Podcast Bites.
You wrote a book called Psychologists Defying the Crowd, Stories of Those Who Battled the Establishment and Won.
Well, that was an edited volume.
That was an edited volume, okay.
And I just contributed one chapter.
Got it.
Okay.
And so I guess it was your chapter. It was called It's Absolutely Impossible, a longitudinal study of response to conventional naysayers. So when people flout conventions, what did you learn from studying people who went against the grain?
Well, first of all, it's sort of like what you said when at the very beginning of this interview. History is written by the winners, okay? And this is one fundamental bias in the research that I do, is that I tend to study the ones who are successful to some degree, right? So there are a lot of people who failed in the initial part of their careers who just it gets back to that determination and persistence and energy and drive and all that, and then they finally have their big success. They may have more failures later too, and who knows? Given what's going on, Facebook may end up failing. It's possible, but because of that determination, they finally have a success. What I don't study is all those people who failed and failed and failed and finally gave up.
Or just became excellent at failing and never stopped.
Because the thing that's interesting to me is that if you just do, on the back of a napkin calculation, the number of creative geniuses out there, and I focus on creative geniuses rather than leaders, because leaders are restricted in number of positions they can occupy. There can only be one president at any one time. But one thing that's nice about creativity and creative genius is you can invent your own domain. It's done all the time. There's all of a sudden something, that, like the smartphone or whatever, that didn't exist before. If you look at creative geniuses, a lot of them, well, I was going to say, back of the napkin calculation, there should be probably about 10 times more than we actually know, roughly. In other words, there's probably a huge percentage of people out there who didn't make it. And they're now, Uber drivers or, whatever. And they're now successful. And you might want to say, well, there's something in them that they're not smart enough, they didn't have enough drive, whatever. But I'm not buying that, because I think a lot of them it's the luck of the draw. They had some ideas. Sometimes they have really good ideas, and then all of a sudden they're scooped by somebody else. Mm-hmm. I had a graduate student who did this really, really great dissertation, and she's getting all ready to write it up for publication in a major journal. And then she saw that the article had already been published on the exact same topic. And so she was scooped. Okay.
Yeah, that can be frustrating.
Fortunately, she got a postdoc and retooled herself and did something else. But the point is that there's a lot of people, even with good ideas, that find themselves preempted. I mean, have you heard of Gray? Have you heard of Gray's telephone?
Exactly.
You've heard of Bell Telephone, I'm sure, but you haven't heard of Gray Telephone. Okay. Well, Gray's patent application was delivered the same day as Bell's patent application, but it was processed second.
It's really interesting. There's a paper written by a Stanford law professor I used to do yoga with in Mountain View. And it's called The Myth of the Lone Wolf Inventor, or the Lone Inventor, maybe. And he goes through all these major inventions like that, where at least 2 or 3 people seem to have the same idea at about the same time. And it was sort of a race to the patent office. And sort of saying that it's rare that there's just one person who's working on a problem. And no one can explain why that is, but it seems to hold true.
Actually, I've done research on that.
Oh, yeah, cool. Oh, do tell me what you've learned.
No,
That's
no,
what
no.
we're here for.
There's a phenomenon called the multiples phenomenon, where two or more people come up with the same idea, an invention or discovery, roughly the same time, but completely independently of each other. Okay. It turns out that you can fit a probability model to that. It turns out primarily a chance phenomenon. And this is how it works. You have a bunch of people who all basically learn the same thing. They develop a similar expertise. They all go to graduate school and study physics or study engineering or whatever it happens to be. And so they have a pool of things in their head. And then they start generating combinations. And just by chance, you're going to have two or more people come up with the same idea at the same time. Okay. And in fact, they almost have to come up with the same idea at the same time, because the second one guy or gal communicates that idea, that preempts anybody else. For example, right now, I can guarantee you that absolutely no one in the world is working on inventing the wheel, because that idea has already been disseminated. Everybody knows it's been invented already. Okay. So everybody's working on combinations of ideas, and you can actually, that haven't been produced yet. And then as soon as it's communicated, then that terminates any further work on that particular problem. And what's interesting, for example, is as you look at the history of these multiples, because scientific communication has become more and more efficient, the time lag between the first and last duplicate has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. In fact, now it's almost instantaneous, because people can post it online. They made a major discovery, they can post it online. And so it turns out it's a totally probabilistic phenomenon.
Motherfucker.